Hey guys, so I want to make a very quick video on contracting. Now, most pilots, like most people, when they form their own businesses, they do independent contracting. Now there are some jobs that require like a pilot's license. So I mean, you can be a drone pilot and an employee, or you can be like me, that you're an independent contractor. Whatever you decide to do, it's up to you. Now there's a lot of things about contracting that you need to understand. I've worked with some great companies that, I mean, they really like, it was a privilege working with them. And I worked with others that honestly, I mean, I only did a few jobs and afterwards I said, okay, that's it, goodbye, go pound sand. Simply because, the pay wasn't very good or whatever. So you got to really do your due diligence. Understand that as an independent contractor, there's a lot of stipulations there that do not apply to employ, like they don't apply if you're an employee, and vice versa. So make sure whenever you start doing contracting, make sure you read the fine print and make sure you understand exactly what you're doing, because I see this a lot, like especially on Facebooks and the chat rooms and stuff like that of other pilots, and then they start seeing on, oh well, this company does this, and this doesn't sound right, and blah blah. We should unionize and this, that, and the other. And the fact is, as a contractor, I mean, there are certain privileges that as a contractor you just do not have that you have as an employee, and vice versa. So make sure you read what your contract, make sure you know exactly what you're doing. Make sure that whenever you're actually going to work, make sure it's actually worth your time. Now, let me tell you a little story. I was working with this company that I will not name, and I'll make more videos about contracting and specifically this company. But just to keep it short, this company, they do a lot of like home inspections and stuff like that, and they have a network of pilots, and the pay is extremely subpar. I mean, and they were not really going to be paying anything more anytime soon. As a matter of fact, just in general, even the jobs that paid better, still just with the amount of work you have to do, and it's just not worth your time. And that's one thing I got to point out is, even if, for example, if the job states that you're making 100 an hour, okay, well, 100 an hour, that sounds fantastic, right? I mean, you think that's the gold standard, but you also have to consider, okay, well, how much are you spending up front? What are your operating costs? Whenever you go out into one of these jobs, like I said, not all jobs, not all contracting companies pay well. Some pay very well, others don't pay at all. Others just pay very little. Even if you get a pretty good rate, well, you still have to consider all your other costs. Now, I've had the privilege of working with some really good ones, and I've had the disprivilege of working with some really bad ones. I've worked with some that, like I said, honestly, after a couple jobs, I said, okay, you guys definitely don't know what you're doing. You guys are a horrible company to work for. And I'm not going to do it. And I've had others that, they paid me a pretty good amount of money for really the work that I was doing, which, I'm not going to say wasn't much, but definitely, definitely the pay was more than fair. And I mean, I was more than satisfied with the rate and everything and what I was doing. So, definitely you got to do your due diligence as an independent contractor, because there are a lot of things out there. Also, you got to be very careful with what they ask you to do, because a lot of times these companies, they don't really know what they're talking about. A lot of them, they just want a job done. They don't really care how you do it. Really how you do it is kind of on you, because you're supposed to be the expert on the matter. So if you start getting contracts, if people start asking you for things that may not be a good idea, you might want to think twice, or you might want to say, hey, listen, I'm sorry, but I can't do this. So you just be mindful of that. A lot of times, especially with new pilots, and myself included, we just want to hop on the first thing that pays, because obviously we want to start making money, we want to start practicing, we want to start getting stuff in our portfolio, and that's fine. And sometimes, yes, you got to take the jobs that don't pay well, because at the end of the day, listen, it's just stuff on your portfolio. Sometimes you just got to, keep your mouth shut, just do the job, and see if something better pops up at some point. But with that being said, you also have to know your worth. You got to know what you bring to the table. And, if really you see that, like whatever company that's hiring you to do a job, if they're not paying you enough, if the work conditions are not good, if when you really calculate everything, all your operating costs and everything, if they don't match up to the pay, then you either say something or just don't do business with this company. I've had like I said, I've had the pleasure of working with some companies that, they're well connected. Also because of like the quality of my work, they saw, okay, no, like we like this guy, we can definitely pay him well. And yeah, that's kind of how it goes. I mean, it's not always easy to get these jobs. And sometimes really it's just kind of like a luck of the draw. Sometimes you really have to like try many different avenues and see what works, because a lot of times it's not going to happen all at once. I had one company just kind of call me out of the blue, and they say, hey, listen, we saw your profile, can you do this work for us? And, the pay was very good. So I said, yes, of course I can do it, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. So, generally speaking, as I said, because since most people, when we start our own drone companies, obviously we're independent contractors, just be very careful who you contract with. Understand that a lot of times, the pay is not always going to be as good as you might think. Sometimes they might throw you a nice figure of like $100 an hour. But when you really get down to it, like, okay, well, what are you actually spending up front? And see if that matches up. You got to mitigate risk. You got to mitigate also regulations. I mean, if I told you that I followed all the rules, I'd be lying to you. I don't. I mean, a lot of us don't. It's just reality. Some things are better in theory than in practice, but you have to know what to do and what not to do. For me, what I do is I do a job profitability calculator, and if somebody throws me a figure that may or may not be, what I would like, or just in general, if I'm doing a lot of work, well, I got to see how much I'm actually going to be taking home, and also just mitigate risk. If, I've had people ask me, hey, can you do some cool shots for us on a yacht, and we want to do it over the water and everything. Well, these are all things I have to mitigate, because if my drone crashes into something, well, there goes my drone right there, because if it falls in the water, that's it. You definitely have to mitigate risk. And, I've had people throw money at me and say, hey, listen, can you do this for us? And blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, hey, listen, I'm sorry, but the risk is too high for what you're asking me to do, and what you're paying. So you definitely have to do your due diligence on that. And just understand that, look, especially as a contractor, you have the option to say no. And you don't need to say yes to it all. I mean, granted, you got to be realistic, and, sometimes you got to know when to bite the bullet and just do the job. And then other times, just look, it's not worth it, whether it's the money, whether it's the risk, whether it's, maybe the prestige to your company. If somebody asks you to do something that's a little bit shady, news travels fast. And, especially now with social media and everything, I mean, nothing stays secret for very long. So if you do a job that might be a little bit shady, might cost somebody something, I don't know, and, word goes around, hey, such and such from such and such company, they're known for doing, this and this, and that's illegal, or that's just immoral. Well, I mean, that's going to follow you. So yeah, just be very careful who you accept jobs from. Be very careful with the companies that you contract with. Make sure you read in between the lines, because as I said, like before, I signed a non-compete agreement that I'm trying to get out of. When I really look at the non-compete, I don't think it's fair. I mean, I've even consulted lawyers about it. They said, that the non-compete in general is going to be kind of hard to enforce, but it's still possible it's going to be enforced. So, to just be very careful, to tread very carefully. And if I'm going to try to skirt around the non-compete agreement, well, to be very careful and with the way I do things. So yeah, these are all things you got to take into consideration. Make sure you read the fine print, make sure you know what you're getting paid, make sure you know what your operating costs are, make sure you know the legality, make sure you know the risks that you run. Especially, if you want to stay in business, sometimes you got to know when to say no, and you got to know when to say yes. So just, little thing to keep in mind. As I said, this is a very exciting industry. I love it. But there are things you got to take into consideration, and there are things that you gotta understand about this industry, because it's still fairly new. In the grand scheme of things, it's still fairly new. A lot of people don't know much about it. Even companies that hire you, the person that hired you specifically, they may not know a lot of the laws. They may ask you to do stuff that you really should not be doing. I mean, I was asked one time to tailgate into a gated community and do a job. I said, no, I'm not doing that. So just be very careful. But yeah, honestly, great industry to be in. Really fun. Just do your due diligence and you'll be good to go.